Good to be with you, my friend. So I'll hit the share screen and get started on our next two chapters. We got two chapters today again. So um last week we witnessed the baby wars, is how I would call them, between Leah and Rachel, right? The who's got which baby and who deserves it and all the rest, right?
Reality TV at its
Reality
finest.
TV, and oh, God bless
Baby
both those
wars.
ladies. That they're, who provided the most babies and who deserves the most love. It was pretty tragic and sad, but
Sad thing is, if you put a show out there and called it that, people would flock to it in droves.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Then we saw the whole sheep and goat wars between Jacob and Laban, right? Like, how much is he going to get paid for his labor? And speckled goats or dark sheep, or all, speckled goats, dark sheep, all those kinds of things, and the breeding practices, and then finally the emergency midnight departure of Jacob and the family from Laban because they were fearful of him, probably for good reason. So now we're on the road back to Canaan. God has asked him to come home. And of course, Laban caught up to him. And so we have literally one line that concludes that part of the story and then launches us into the next, here beginning with the 32nd chapter. Laban started early in the morning, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and blessed them. And Laban went to return to his place. And I just need to pause for a moment and say, I don't remember the name of the monk or monks that put the numbers on the chapters and verses. But I'm always curious as to why on earth they made some of the choices they made. Like, why would you not leave that in the last chapter and then this is a new chapter? But oh well, I'm not the monk and I didn't have to worry about it. Maybe it's a different thing in Latin. I have no idea.
And new verse numbers
Yeah.
in the middle of a sentence sometimes.
Yes. And you just
Not
sort
a
of
ton
go,
of them, but more than a few.
right. Or three sentences in one verse sometimes, and then one sentence in the next five verses, right? And you go, okay, whatever. It does help us. I mean, the whole point is always just to remember that this is all one story. We just divide it up so we can find things, not so they're divided up. Right. The whole point of the numbering system was so we could find them. And so it wasn't just like, do you remember that part in the middle of Genesis? And everyone's flipping around in a book trying to figure it out. It was just a nice way to get everything together. But so we really begin today with, as Yaakov went on his way, messengers of God encountered him. And Yaakov said when he saw them, "This is a camp of God." And he called the name of that place Me'aim, double camp. Now Yaakov sent messengers on ahead of him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, in the territory of Edom, and commanded them thus, saying, "Thus say to my lord Esau," or Esau, "Thus says your servant Yaakov, I have journeyed with Laban and have tarried until now," or sojourned. "Oak and donkey, sheep and servant and maid have become mine. I have sent to tell my lord to find favor in your eyes." Messengers returned to Yaakov, saying, "We came to your brother, to Esau, but he is already coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Yaakov became exceedingly afraid and was distressed. He divided the people that were with him and the sheep and the oxen and the camels into two camps, saying to himself, "Should Esau come against the one camp and strike it, the camp that is left will escape." Then Yaakov said, "God of my father Abraham, God of my father Yitzhak, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your land, to your kindred, and I will deal well with you.' Too small am I for all the faithfulness and trust that you have shown your servant. For with only my rod did I cross this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Pray, save me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I am in fear of him, lest he come and strike me down, mothers and children alike. But you have said, I will deal well with you. I will make your seed like the sand of the sea, which is too much
at the
to count."
bottom. But you can see him on there, honey. You can hold it up and see him.
Spending the night there that night, he took a gift from what was at hand for Esau his brother: she-goats 200 and kids 20, ewes 200 and rams 20, nursing camels and their young 30, cows 40 and bulls 10, she-asses 20 and colts 10, or a whole bunch of animals. And he handed them over to his servants herd by herd separately, and said to his servants, cross on ahead of me and leave room between herd and herd. He charged the first group, saying, when Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And to whom do these ahead of you belong? Then say to your servant, to Yaakov, it is a gift sent to my lord to Esau, and here he himself is also behind us. Thus he charged the second, and thus the third, and thus all that were walking behind the herd, saying, according to this word shall you speak to Esau when you come upon him. You shall say, also here, your servant Yaakov is behind us. For he said to himself, I will wipe the anger from his face with the gift that goes ahead of my face. Afterward, when I see his face, perhaps he will lift up my face or accept me. So the story ended with the abrupt flight, for Esau is now resumed, right? We sort of had the interlude of Jacob getting married and having kids and becoming rich and being blessed according to the promise that his father gave him, as well as God bestowed upon him in the wilderness. All of that's come to fruition. So now we were coming back, but we have to go back and think for a minute. We have to remember that Jacob stole the blessings of Esau, right? He stole that blessing that was due Esau and tricked him out of his birthright. And he literally had to flee in the middle of the night, more or less, because Esau wanted him dead, right? We have to sort of go back and just remind ourselves quickly that the brothers did not leave on good terms. And so, yeah, we should be starting with an idea of a little bit of dread here, right? Like Esau has every right to be angry. Esau has every right to attack Jacob. Esau has every right to be furious at his brother. So with all of that in mind, where they sort of head in that direction, we get this really strange one-line theophany of angels, messengers appearing. Like he just sort of, Jacob's a fascinating cat in a lot of ways, but this is one of the more fascinating lines. Like he's just walking down the street. He's like, hey, they're angels. Cool. That's it. That's the whole. I mean, if I saw angels, I'd probably have a conversation. I'd want to have a little bit more like, what are you guys doing here? Do you need something? Do you have a message? But he just sort of goes, hey, cool, there's angels. All right, I'll name it. But that's it. Right. And then behind you have the dreaded approach. So you have God present on some level as messengers of God present. And then you also have 400 men showing up, which certainly sounds like an army to smite him, right? Like, why has he only got men with him? And why is he, and I misspelled Esau. What happens, right? And the one thing that is great about this is just a well told story, right? I mean, there are times that things can be a little clumsy or fast. This is an excellently told story because it's sort of one line after another. Is like you can see Jacob twisting and not sure what's going to happen and fearful, and should I send more gifts, or maybe I'll beg him not to kill me, or like you can see all of it just right there.
It builds up tension very nicely, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with all that clear idea that if nothing else, Jacob realizes his brother has every right to be mad at him. And again, he has so many folks, he divides everyone into two camps in the hopes that some people can escape, sort of planning for the worst, which is an interesting way to approach this. And then he shares one of the more earnest prayers in scripture, save me. I did all this stuff. I know I did it, but I might even deserve for him to attack me, but please save me anyway, right? It's a fascinating and earnest prayer. Like it's very formal, like, oh God, you told me to come here. You told me to do this. You've given me so many things, but it's also oh Lord, help me. Oh, help me. I am in trouble.
Again, just like all of us, right?
Amen. Brueggemann made a note, and so did Freetham, a little bit about that the term he used is not actually save me, but it's snatch me away from Esau. That literally, it's not just save me, it's like get me out of this mess. I don't even want to meet him. I don't want to see him. I'm scared to death. Just snatch me out of this horrible situation, which is perhaps even more relatable, right? Like, I think all of us will say, like, oh, please help me in this really hard day ahead. But the real prayer we're praying most of the time is, oh, could I like have a illness and not have to go to that meeting? Could I just miss that day at work? Could I miss that day with my family, whatever it is? Could you just snatch me out of this situation, Lord? That'd be real. Thank you. That would be awesome. So, um, so Brueggemann though has a sort of quote about this reflection. I don't know if I agree with it, but let's see what y'all think. He's talking about Jacob. There is no hint of remorse on his part, but he is not unaware of the wrath of Esau or that he himself is the wrongdoer. One senses in his actions that he does not regard the wrath of Esau as unwarranted. Which I find an interesting way to describe this. I think that's sort of the understatement of the year. He certainly knows that his brother should be angry or has a right to be angry. I feel like that's certainly in there. Maybe I'm reading into it. Maybe Brueggemann's right. I feel like there is a little bit of remorse within this, but he doesn't express it. He doesn't, I mean, I can agree with Brueggemann. He doesn't say, oh, I have wronged my brother and I should beg forgiveness. He doesn't say that, but he's certainly aware that there's wrath and probably warranted wrath.
But by sensing the fact that that if Esau attacked him, okay, it's warranted, isn't he in fact, doesn't that show remorse?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it says, hey, I was wrong. Okay. I mean, it's basically right. He has every right to feel this way. Okay. I wronged him. And isn't that remorse? Yeah.
I don't see it that way.
You don't? Okay.
I mean, I think, I mean, I see he's been playing a rough and tumble game. I mean, he's been dealing with Laban, and his world has been, you struggle for what you get, and you try to get it any way you can, and you expect, that means no holes barred, and you expect that's what other people are going to do to you. And so it's like, to me, it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I've got it coming. But it's not that because I did it wrong. It's like, he's going to overpower me, and my tricks won't do me any good here. Now, I don't see that as remorse.
Okay.
He does say at that one point, I'm not worthy of all the steadfast love and faithfulness, but that doesn't really address, I mean, he doesn't say why he's not worthy.
Right.
And he is the heel. I understand that, but okay.
Maybe I am I think I might be on your side, Stefan. Maybe I just want him to be showing remorse, but in that sort of classic way of, and maybe this is as a guy, I'll name it, right? Some guys will never apologize, even if they know they did everything wrong. The only way they apologize is basically by going like, I probably deserve to get hit in the face right now, right? Like, they won't say I was wrong, but they can say I probably deserved it. Right? There's sort of a weird way people engage too. I don't know that I see lots of guys do, where they won't say I'm sorry or I did something wrong, but they will definitely sort of accept the fact that they were deserving of a punishment in the midst of it anyway. May not be remorse, but it's certainly an acceptance that they maybe didn't play all the rules quite well.
There are a few women like that too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so no remorse. That was the next one. He goes on to say, which I do find interesting, he notes that Jacob is extremely deferential. That's sort of what we were saying. Likely because he knows he was wrong. If I find favor in your eyes is mentioned 4 times. He keeps sort of saying to Esau, if I find favor in your eyes, then please accept me these gifts. If I find favor in your eyes, please accept, that I am here with you. And, this sort of idea that, again, it's not, Brueggemann, the way Brueggemann describes it is it's sort of this weird situation. Jacob, before he left, showed no deference to his brother. It was take and get what you need, right? And I'm going to fight you and battle you. And in this case, it's this very, very different Jacob who is deferential. Maybe it's just out of fear, but it's still a man who's, did not he's not coming in thinking that his tricks can save him or his guile. It's well, maybe I just need to bow down, which he bows down he bows down 7 times later in the story, right? He has to do that. Now, Brueggemann seems to see it as consonant with Jacob's personality to a certain degree, that maybe he's just playing a different game. If I play the differential game, that'll get me what I want this time, while before I had to play the deceptive game. But I think that's a little cynical. I will say this. This is my take on it, is Jacob has for years taken things by force, sort of along Lynn's idea, right? But I also think 20 years with Laban, he might have realized that no holds barred kind of approach can, when you're on the other side of it, if you always win, then it's a great system. But when you start realizing that it can make a mess of things, I don't know that Jacob might be as willing to. He never shows remorse, I agree, but I also think he might have realized, like, oh, maybe there's some better ways than always being combative or always trying to take by trickery and force. I don't know. I feel like there's something. The reason that story, Brueggemann pretty much just throws away that intermediate part, as farce, as comedy. I think if you take it more seriously as part of the lessons of Jacob growing into adulthood, and that maybe he got taken advantage of too, that it might then be that Jacob has had, if not a change of heart, just a realization that it's not always fun when you lose these situations, right? At the very least, he's learned that, if not more. I think it's maybe tempered Jacob a little bit, if nothing else. Plus, he does recognize that when he left, he had nothing to lose, right? When he was taking stuff from Esau, he had nothing to lose, but now he has everything to lose, right? He's got wives, he's got children, he's got family, he's got crops, all these different flocks. He's got all these different things that he can lose now, which always changes our approach in the world. When there's nothing to lose, it's pretty easy to play these games. When you can lose your 11 sons and flocks and your wives in a situation, there's a different approach too, that you're playing with it's not house money anymore. I don't know. That's my reflection. If you go sort of that's how I enter into the story, which is that Jacob may have learned a little bit, and he's got more to lose in this exchange with Esau than he did when he left Esau. All right, so Brueggemann makes one more point that I want to bring up because I find it an odd one. I don't know. Brueggemann's usually very, very studied and clear about this is what is or isn't said. Every now and then he does, like we all do, gets a little eisegetical, reads into it maybe a little bit more. Actually, he reads into a lot of things. But this one just seemed a little different. He believes that the angels that show up in that first line are sort of notice that Jacob is protected at all times. He sees that moment like, oh, before this all happens, God sort of shows up with these angels as a reminder that Jacob's going to make it through, and Jacob is still that protected, blessed, anointed one of God versus Esau, right? The problem that I have with that interpretation that Brueggemann has is Jacob sure doesn't believe that. And I don't know that I see it, mainly because Jacob doesn't say, well, the angels are here. God's with me. I'm going to be safe. It's much more, he is still fearful, but maybe he's just not hearing what God's saying, which we all do that too. Any thoughts on those angels? It's sort of an interesting little starter there. Nope. No.
Well, but
Okay,
isn't God also on Esau's side? He's on all our sides, right?
Yeah.
Or she. I use the
Mhm.
pronoun he. It could be a she too, but at any rate.
Amen.
I have a point to make about the angels.
Yeah.
You remember when they appear, the first thing they almost always say is,
Do
fear
not be
not.
Yeah.
Fear not.
True. That's an interesting one. All right. Well, we'll keep going. We got a little ways to go, so we'll plow on through. So the gift, that is all those flocks, crossed over ahead of his face, but he spent the night on that night in the camp. And he arose during that night, took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children to cross the Yabbok crossing. He took them and brought them across the river, and he brought across what belonged to him. And Yaakov was left alone. Now a man wrestled with him until the coming up of dawn. And when he saw that he could not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. The socket of Yaakov's thigh had been dislocated as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for dawn has come up." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." He said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Yaakov." Then he said, "Not as Yaakov heel sneak shall your name be henceforth uttered, but rather as Israel, God fighter, for you have fought with God and men and have prevailed." Then Yaakov asked and said, "Pray tell me your name." But he said, "Now why do you ask after my name?" And he gave him farewell blessing there. Yaakov called the name of the place Peniel, face of God, for I have seen God face to face, and my life has been saved. The sun rose on him as he crossed by Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel do not eat the sinew that is on the socket of the thigh until this day, for he had touched the socket of Yaakov's thigh at the sinew. All right, so this is one of those most uncertain, ambiguous, what the heck is going on moments in all of Scripture. And it's certainly very famous for that ambiguity. And it's both small and large ambiguity, right? So on one level, the fundamental question is, who is the man with whom Jacob wrestles, right? Like, who is this being, this person, this God? Lots of theories have been placed out there. Is it God? Is it a Canaanite deity? Is it Esau come early? Is it a wrestling with his conscience? Lots of ideas about what is this identity. I think it's safe to say that while it might have started as Esau, or it might have started as a Canaanite deity or some other things, that's what some of the scholars sort of posit, it's clear that Esau believes it is God. I mean, Jacob believes it is God, and that's what the story ends up saying, that it's God, right? I mean, so we have to lean into that fact, even if it might have started out as something different. By the time the text that we have, it's pretty clearly listed as God, right? The one thing I do want to know, so that's sort of like the large question. Then there's the part that I love about this story is the writer, whoever it was, gives you a pretty amazing idea of wrestling by not identifying who is speaking, who is wrestling who. He just keeps using these sort of pronouns that, like, he was wrestling him, and you're like, who was wrestling who, right? And then he was pulling away from him, and he said, "Let me go." And it's like, who said let him go? What is going on? But that's also how wrestling works, right? Like, when you're in a wrestling match, when you're in that kind of situation, it's arms and legs, and is that my leg? Is that your leg? Or who's grabbing what? What are we doing here? Kind of, it gives this brilliant way of telling the story that lets you get an idea that they are all wrapped up together, right? That there's, where does one person start? Where does the other person end? As they push and pull them. It's this, I mean, just again, it's brilliantly written on that side of it. So Brueggemann has an idea here, but he says, if this other one is God, what does it mean to say that Jacob has come to a draw with him? What kind of God is it who will be pressed to a draw by this man? And what kind of man is our father Jacob that he can force a draw, even against heaven? This is no ordinary man, and certainly no ordinary God. And clearly, this is no ordinary story. which is probably the best way I've ever heard that story summed up, quite frankly. I give Brueggemann full props on that one, because it is, while there's lots of questions of what does it mean, these are some of the most fundamental questions, right? Like, what is Jacob doing? What is God doing? Whoa, wow. This is not an ordinary situation. Jacob proves again that he will do anything to get a blessing. He will dress up in his brother's clothes. He will wear animal skins. He will wrestle God himself. It does not matter. Jacob is going to fight for a blessing, which I find particularly interesting about Jacob, quite frankly. He is absolutely convinced that blessings matter. And I think our world might be a very different place if we had that understanding that blessings really were that important and descriptive to the world. Israel is that blessing, that new name that redefines him from heel. He goes literally from heel to hero, or at least one who has wrestled with God, right? He is one who has wrestled with God. El is the ending, right? So the meaning here is not super clear. You'll hear different translations. What we can say, the El that ends Israel is short for God in Hebrew. That's Elohim, or El is God in Hebrew. Isra can mean prevail, can be wrestled with, can be like, it all has those sort of similar meanings, but it's not completely clear what is meant. We'll probably just take it at face value, which is you have striven with God and prevailed, right? Is what the angel or God says in this wrestling match. So there's no reason not to take it for face value there, but it is interesting. But the blessing is not like his father's blessing. The blessing is you are no longer a heel, you are now someone who has wrestled with God, right? Or is wrestling. There is conversation about, is it a past tense verb or a present tense? You know, did he wrestle with God, or is he wrestling with God? An ongoing process. I like to believe it's continuous personally, but that's just me. Brueggemann also says, unlike every other such relation in which God rules and humankind obeys, Israel is a newness which has prevailed with God. And so he comes to his brother changed. He has a new power. I'm not sure if I understand what he's saying there, but what do y'all think on this idea that now he is changed, he has a new power, he has a new relationship with God? You buy in Brueggemann's idea here, or do we even understand Brueggemann's idea here?
Well, how do you prevail with God? That disturbs me just a little bit. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, certainly Jacob, or now Israel, okay, was not the winner in this wrestling match, not per se, right?
I mean,
he got injured. He got injured, right, in the whole thing. And all I can do is, I don't know about the rest of you, but I certainly wrestle with God. Okay. You know, I kind of see this story as a metaphor almost. Okay. Because I know I've wrestled. Okay. I certainly have.
Amen.
And I don't think I prevailed, Bill. I'm just saying.
Yes. I mean, I think, that was my first thing was, he has prevailed. And I was like, I don't know about winning.
Yeah.
But of course, I guess, honestly, the best we could ever hope for from God is a draw. I don't think anybody's going to win that fight. So the best you could ever hope for is a draw, but still, he walks away. He does walk away changed, but I don't know if he has a new power.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think I had written this down during Buddy's class on the Son of Laughter, but I had written a note, a question: did Jacob need an encounter that would awaken him to his dependence on God?
Oh,
As if he hadn't had enough already, but maybe he needed one more.
We all need one more.
Mhm.
Especially, I can say it this way. We always need a reminder that we need God when we get really to a point where we've got enough that we don't need anything else.
Mhm, mhm.
He's got kids, he's got lots of animals, he's got all these things that he can lie to himself and believe he is self-sufficient now, right?
Mhm.
But this story, I think, demonstrates he's not self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, I think that's what this story shows. He's not self-sufficient.
And I think that's Karen's point, right? That he needs that reminder. Sometimes we need that reminder. If we're going to go with a more metaphorical kind of reading, especially, right?
Mhm.
What did I put in here? For me, he keeps talking about how this is a new idea, but Abraham bargains with God. Like this is sort of consonant with this family tree, right? I mean, Abraham spent an entire chapter going like, hey, what about 50 people? What about 45 people? Like that whole thing. Israel, I mean, in this case, Jacob is absolutely part of that and probably takes it to a new level, but it's not like no one in the family has questioned God or pushed God or wrestled with God before, right? I mean, bartered and maybe not physically wrestled. No one else physically wrestles with God other than Jacob, but there's lots of times people are in much more sort of back and forth, tete-a-tete kind of conversations with God.
I wonder what it would have meant if the writer had shown God winning the wrestling match
Yeah,
versus it coming to a draw.
sure.
I mean, what difference would it have made?
Very good question.
Seems to me God had it come to a draw instead of Jacob winning or God winning. And that's really showing a lesson there. That it's not about winning.
Absolutely.
How do you win a wrestling match with God? Okay.
Well, the bigger question for me is why do we need to talk about who won or lost, period?
Exactly.
Right? I mean, sort of to Roy's question, like, I'm perfectly comfortable. I mean, this is just me. I'm perfectly comfortable with going, it was a draw, which is what they seem to say, or that God knew that Jacob needed to wrestle more than it was an attempt to. I mean, I'm pretty sure God could have pinned him in 2 seconds. God, the creator of the universe could have flipped him on his back and stopped him in a minute. But that doesn't mean that's what Jacob did or didn't need, right? I mean, I'm not saying he just toyed with him, but I feel like there's something in there about that kind of idea to me more.
Are we putting too much emphasis on winning and losing?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe it's just the tussling of the relationship with God.
Right.
Mhm.
I think so.
And the fact that you have a wrestling match, okay, demonstrates that you recognize God.
Yes.
And that you are not God.
Well, and the gift of this story for me has always been that God is willing to wrestle with us.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the true gift to me. It's not who won the match. It's that if I am frustrated as hell with God and the whole situation, God's willing to get in the mud with me and roll around in the dirt to get me back to the place I need to get. Right? Because a lot of times God could just be the omnipotent voice on the hill saying, stop doing that,
Mhm.
which personally doesn't work well with me all the time. But the idea of a God who wrestles and pushes and prods, but also in that sort of intimacy, right? I mean, there's a much more intimate view here of the world.
I like this story, by the way.
Oh, I do too. I love the story.
I like this story very much.
There is a final point that I find interesting that Brueggemann makes. He notes that the new name cannot be separated from the new crippling, sort of to Roy's point, right? For the crippling is the substance of the name, right? Like he doesn't walk away necessarily as the winner. He walks away limping. And not even that someone has to win or lose, but if he did win, it came at a cost. Like if you want to go down the line and say, well, he won, or he at least got him to a draw, it still came at a cost. And that cost is literally in his name as well as in his limp, right? He sees it as a victory and a defeat. There's danger in drawing too near and claiming too much. This is a Brueggemann idea. Brueggemann notes, and this is a great, interesting comment from Frederick Buechner, has called this event the magnificent defeat. And it can be read that way. It's a defeat because he limped. It is magnificent, nearly Promethean in the prevailing. Brueggemann's really concerned about him prevailing. Brueggemann flips it a little bit and wants to call it the crippling victory. I'm not sure why Brueggemann's so concerned about Jacob winning. I like the magnificent defeat, quite frankly, which is you wrestled with God and you came out limping with a new name. That's a pretty good situation to be in with God, I think. That you were marked but beloved and you were part of the conversation. That's pretty good. The prevailing part is Brueggemann's pushing on that.
I'll take it.
Yeah. So he then continues to say, Jacob did gain victory. Okay. And he lived every day thereafter to show others and himself, that there are no untroubled victories with this Holy One. Only now can Jacob understand that his exclamation of 28:16 should not be made lightly. God is in this place. That is cause for dread as well as exultation. Which, to be fair to Brueggemann, this is a very clear idea in Jewish and Christian spirituality, that you don't have a simple invocation. You don't just go, hey, God, come be part of this event, unless you're ready for God to be part of the event, because you know God's got a different idea than we do for how it's supposed to work. And when you ask for the God who created heavens and the earth and the word, you're asking for a whole lot of power in the room that you can't control, right? There's this very clear idea that God is so other and different that inviting God into situations is one that we should recognize may come with things that we aren't expecting. But what do we think about this idea that God's presence should be for both dread as well as exultation, or that there's no untroubled victories? Or we throw out Brueggemann's whole idea.
I still go back to that concept of fighting and wrestling and victory and defeat. I don't think either of those things play into our relationship with God. And maybe the word I want is tension rather than victory or defeat.
Yeah, I like that word. I like that word very much, yeah. Well, as I said from the start, Brueggemann uses those terms of victory and defeat and prevailing and all these kinds of conversations that I don't see the text using in the same way at all. And I'm much more comfortable with the whole point of the story being that engagement, that wrestling, that striving. And that's one of the definitions you'll see sometimes of Israel is like, you have striven with God, right? Not you have wrestled and prevailed, but you have striven with God. And then you sort of go, okay, I like that. I can deal with that. I mean, I have no problem. If Jacob won, great. If God won, great. That doesn't, neither of those bother me. But I think the bigger point is that there is this deeper connection that's trying to be made, that we, as every human that I know, wrestles with God and what the heck this world means and how it works, and not being satisfied with the myriad problems we have on this plane, right, of existence. We should be wrestling with God anyway. Why is it okay for these things to happen? All right, so I'll push on then. We'll look at the last portion of this chapter and into the next. Oh gosh, that's the wrong chapter. There we go. So moving, we'll do all of 33, which is a short chapter, but it's finally connecting with Esau. Yaakov lifted up his eyes and saw there was Esau coming, and with him 400 men. And he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids, and he put the maids and their children first, Leah and her children behind them, and Rahel and Joseph behind them, while he himself advanced ahead of them. And once again, we get a pretty clear idea of exactly how he values his family and what order they come in, right? The maids, Leah, and then Rachel finally at the last. And he bowed low to the ground 7 times until he had come close to him, to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him. He embraced him, flung himself upon his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. Then he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, "What are these to you?" And he said, "The children with whom God has favored your servant." Then the maids came close, and they and their children, and bowed low. Then Leah and her children came close and bowed low, and afterward Joseph and Rahel came close and bowed low. He said, "What to you is all this camp that I have met?" And he said, "To find favor in my Lord's eyes." And Esau said, "I have plenty, my brother. Let what is yours remain yours." And Yaakov said, "No, I pray, if I have found favor in your eyes, then take this gift from my hand. For I have, after all, seen your face as one sees the face of God, and you have been gracious to me. Pray, take my token of blessing that is brought to you, for God has shown me favor, for I have everything." Pressed him, and so he took it. Then he said, "Let us travel on, and I will go on at your side." But he said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and the sheep and the oxen are suckling in my care. If we were to push them for a single day, all the animals would die. Pray, let my Lord cross on ahead of his servant, while as for me, I will travel slowly at the pace of the gear ahead of me and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir." Esau said, "Pray, let me leave with you some of the people who are mine." But he said, "For what reason? May I only find favor in my Lord's eyes?" So Esau started back that same day on his journey to Seir, while Yaakov traveled to Sukkot. And he built himself a house there. For his livestock he made sheds. Therefore they called the name of this place Sukkot, sheds. And Yaakov came home in peace to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his homecoming from the country of Aram. And he encamped facing the city, and he acquired the piece of territory where he had spread out his tent from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 lambs worth. There he set up a slaughter site and called it El, God, the God of Israel. All right, so this is some Murray notes. Jacob is certainly wealthy, and God has blessed and prospered Esau as well. He has 400 men, right? But what I find interesting, it's not said, but I feel like it's pretty clearly implied, or questioned even, who received the inheritance? Because Jacob has been gone for 20 years. And basically, Jacob says, this is all the ways God has blessed me. And Esau says, "Don't worry about it. Don't give me some of your stuff. I've got plenty of stuff." And you're like, "Well, but what about all of Isaac's stuff?" Jacob left without any of it. So I feel like maybe Esau ended up with the birthright anyway, just because Jacob wasn't around. I don't know. It's not listed in here. It's not even contemplated. But it sure seems like, once again, God has blessed Esau, even if Jacob was the main person that the story follows, right? Jacob is not, thankfully, Esau has not been completely abandoned by God in these situations. And we've got to give Esau some credit. He seems to be truly excited to see his brother. He seems excited to meet his nephews and nieces, the family. He is, poor Esau gets such a bad rap, but he seems like a genuinely good guy. He may not be so slow, might not be the sharpest tool in the box, and we have to talk about Israel, Jacob, but we just need to talk about this slighted but forgiving brother for a minute, right? I mean, he has every right to be mad at Jacob for taking everything, but he chooses to be loving and forgiving, and we just sort of skip over Esau's amazing response here, which is the heart of the situation. I think at some level, he's just a pretty good guy. Might be a little slow, but he seems awfully loving and forgiving for everything that's happened. Or maybe just because it's been 20 years, he's glad to see his brother again. His twin, again, we have to say it over and over again. They might be fraternal, but they're still twins. He's just glad to see him. And no one, I found that fascinating. Brueggemann or Freetham, no one wanted to just sort of acknowledge Esau's graciousness or just comment again that there's sort of this thing. But so now on to Jacob and the reconciliation itself. Brueggemann definitely acknowledges that Jacob bows and shows deference and offers gifts, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear, maybe a little bit of both. He doesn't really get too far down the road into that. But what Brueggemann does, which I personally don't like, he goes on to question Jacob. He says Jacob begs off with a not very convincing excuse and finally does not go with Esau at all. Even in this last ostentatious reconciliation, Jacob still deceives. He acts in contradiction to what he has said. You know, when he sort of goes like, oh, but my kids are young and the animals will die and I've got to stop here. I can't go with you anymore. And I agree with them. It's a weird excuse. I don't know. I feel like Brueggemann's a little harsh on Jacob on this one. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have an answer, but I kind of think the God wrestling thing is about what is to come. And there may be sort of an element of accountability that's introduced to Yaakov. And really the Esau reaction just reminds me of Joseph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we haven't gotten there yet, obviously.
I agree. I totally agree with you. Okay. This is kind of the beginning of the Joseph saga, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't, it seems to me a precursor of the father and the prodigal son.
That too.
That sentence is almost the same.
Yep.
About Esau.
Absolutely. It's almost word for word the same.
Mhm.
Especially about Esau running to embrace his brother, right? Like that's word for word what Jesus puts out there about the father running back to accept the prodigal son. Brueggemann goes on to say, has the whole notion of a transport Jacob been a ploy without substance, or is it serious? Probably we are not meant to know. I didn't even ask the question.
Yeah.
When I read this, I did not even consider Jacob was being disingenuous at all. Now, I did have a little bit of a thought that maybe Jacob didn't want to go on because he was just worried that he was more worried that his brother might not be serious, or after a couple of days, his brother's ideas might change and he might deliver some retribution later. There might have been fear in that, but I didn't register it as this sort of existential question of has he actually changed. I just think it's because Jacob has terrible family relationships. I mean, God bless. If we can say anything about Jacob, that is a messed up family system, right? I mean, between his uncle taking advantage of him, his wives fighting over him, his mom telling him to betray his dad. I mean, it is a fraught and terrible system. I think Jacob may have just got to a point where he's like, I'm better off without family right now. Thank you. I'm going to just withdraw from this entire system and community.
He should have written a bestseller about it.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. The other thing, since we're coming to the end of time, that I'm just going to push ahead on. So this is my final thought, and I think this is where Brueggemann shines. He notes that the words used for meeting God and meeting Esau are very similar. That is, it's intentionally, these stories are told in parallel, but when he sees the face of God and his brother, you know, he bows, he sees, like, there's this whole sequence, but then he literally says, for truly seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, who he just saw last night, right? I mean, he said, I saw God face to face and I survived, and now I see your face, my brother. And Jacob express, or Israel makes that express correlation between the two, right? And so Brueggemann then says, in the holy God, there is something of the estranged brother, and in the forgiving brother, there is something of the blessing of God. Jacob has seen the face of God, and now he knows that seeing the face of Esau is like that. We're not told in what ways it is like the face of God, but it's definitely there, right? And I think there's a lot to unpack in that parallel that the author has created, because it's in the text. This is not Brueggemann by himself, but Brueggemann's right to draw our attention to it. I would argue that this is ultimately the ultimate moment of reconciliation. This is the Murray edit, right? But from the womb, Jacob has fought his brother. He has imitated and irritated and fought him in all kinds of ways. But this is the first time he sees his brother's face, right? This is the first time he really sees him for the person he is versus the person to strive against. And it changes him and it humbles him, because this is where he sees God, is in that forgiveness and in that reconciliation. That's how I understand that he sees the face of God. It's he finally actually sees his brother versus someone he has to fight, or someone he has to, you know, sort of to Lynn's idea, right? Like it's a no hold barred battle for everything. Instead, he goes, oh, wait, you're my brother and you love me. And it doesn't require the no holds barred battle. It's okay. We can just be. And that's where he finds God, which is in that reconciliation and in that love and in that forgiveness.
Could this also explain, Bill, why he didn't rush on with Esau? Thinking that this is a lot for Jacob to unpack, okay, and kind of deal with. He just might have needed the time to deal with it all, okay? And I mean, this is some pretty heavy stuff. If this is all what happened, and I think it probably is, okay, you know, that's a lot to have to unpack, okay? And I think he needed the time to do that.
Yeah, as far as we know, this is probably the first time he's been treated like this.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
I mean, when has he experienced forgiveness?
Yeah. Forgiveness and acceptance and love?
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Never, poor guy.
With no tricks, no baby war, no tricks. Yeah. Nothing up anyone's sleeve.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, you can see the face of God there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is love and forgiveness. Now, I think we forget that. We haven't talked much about that.
No.
We're talking about love and forgiveness, correct?
Absolutely. We're talking about love and forgiveness. That's the heart of the whole thing. But, and this is the tricky part, sometimes you have to go through the wrestling to get to the love and forgiveness.
Yes.
Or you have to go through Good Friday to have the resurrection on Sunday.
Yes.
A lot of people want to skip the hard work and just go to the easy part, and that's not often how it works.
It's not how life works, is it, Bill?
Not my life.
Not my life either. No.
Maybe some other folks' lives, and good for you, but not mine.
Not mine. Yeah.
Yeah. Other thoughts, my friends, before we go? I love this chapter. It's a good one. We could spend a couple weeks on this probably.
Yeah. I love it. I love it too, Bill.
I'm just thinking about Esau's DNA. It's evidently different from that of everybody else in the family.
Sure seems like it, doesn't it?
Mhm.
He seems ahead of a lot of the game, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, I think Esau seems to be like his father. It seems like he's more like Isaac, isn't he?
Yes, for
Who we
sure.
also see is
Maybe.
slow and forget. Isaac was not a real bad human being either. Okay, he was, but we also don't give him a lot of credit, do we? Okay, so
He's a simpler creature,
yeah,
as
exactly.
Bar Giamatti would say.
Yeah,
Yes.
which kind of reminds me of Forrest Gump. Okay, all right,
Mhm.
all right. Who?
Man. All right, my friends, we got the annual meeting, so I'll see y'all Sunday, if not before.
Okay,
Okay.
that's good. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Everyone.
Thanks,
to
Dave.
see
You too, Bill.
Bye,
Take care,
everybody.
Bill.
Bye.
Thank you. Good session.